Hope was only 13 years old when she first encountered what she later called her nocturnal visitor. She didn't know what it was or why it came to her. She had never seen the creature, only felt it. Hope could smell it. She could also hear it walking around the room. The girl had grown up on a farm and could identify the sound of stomping hooves. She remembered her first encounter with the creature for the rest of her life. After that night, she began to stutter and have epilepsy attacks. It happened on a farm that belonged to her parents. Hope had spent her entire childhood on the farm. She hated the place. It was an old house with rooms full of spiders and rats, with animal skins on the floor and their mummified heads hanging on the walls. Hope's room was the attic, which had been converted into a nursery. Children were usually afraid of lofts, and Hope was no exception. The girl's father was very fond of hunting, and Hope despised him for that hobby. A girl should help out around the house. That was what her parents said. That's why Hope got all the work of cutting up little carcasses of animals. Game, rabbits, squirrels, it was all Hope's concern. After the first time she had to carve up a rabbit that was still alive, Hope couldn't come to her senses for a week. The night of Hope's first encounter with her overnight guest, she had a big fight with her father. Once again, he had had too much to drink and started making his dirty jokes. She ran to her room and locked the door. She was a good kid, but she wished her father was dead at times like this. Tomorrow he would wake up and remember nothing, as usual. Hope couldn't sleep for a long time. The street dogs were very anxious about something today. They barked non-stop. But suddenly, the barking in the street stopped. That silence made the girl feel uncomfortable. That's when she smelled it. It was the smell of animal hair and caramel. The girl was shocked since one thing she always smelled in the attic was the smell of damp. Hope heard something stomping on the wooden floor. The sound wasn't like the paws of a cat or a dog. It was more like hooves. Hope was paralyzed with fear. She lay with her eyes closed and frantically remembered a prayer. The girl could feel the creature approaching, breathing. It was heavy, slow breathing, usually the way animals live when they hunt. She heard something jump on her bed. Something wet and smooth touched her leg. Hope couldn't move. She was speechless by the horror that overtook her. She couldn't even open her eyes. Hope didn't know how much time had passed. It was an eternity to her. She felt something sitting at her feet, staring intently at her. As the fear began to fade, the familiar damp smell returned to the attic, and the dogs barked outside again. Hope realized that the creature had left the room. She looked around. The space was empty. She found no sign of the animal, no bits of hair. The door to her room was still locked. The following day, Hope told her parents everything. Her speech had become choppy, and she stuttered and constantly stuttered from the nightmare she had experienced. No one realized then that the defect would now be with her for life. Her father said the girl had made the thing up to scare them, and if anyone got into her room, it was the neighbor's cat or a wild raccoon, and next time he would be sure to shoot them. But the girl's story alarmed her mother greatly. Hope waited dreadfully for the next night. She begged her parents to let her spend the night with them. A girl your age should be able to cope with her fears, her father told her, and Hope went to sleep in the attic. She took an old Bible with her. Her mother had always said faith could protect her from evil spirits and ghosts. She lay in bed and hoped to fall asleep as soon as possible before the creature returned to her. But the girl had no time to sleep. Like last night, she smelled caramel and loud animal breath. This time the beast was somewhere near the door. Hope overcame her fear and opened her eyes. She saw two small glowing circles in the far corner of her room. The middle of the circles was dark. Only their edges glowed a dull orange. The two little pupils were motionless. But then they began to move. They moved left and right, up to the ceiling and down. Hope thought the entity was studying her. "Get out! Get out of my room!" The girl screamed. Both glowing circles froze, but they weren't going to disappear. Hope crawled her head under the covers and held the icon against her. The girl heard the sound of hooves again. She realized the creature was coming toward her. Suddenly, something began to choke her. Invisible furry paws squeezed her throat and pressed so hard that the girl started to lose consciousness. She could not resist. She did not know how to fight the invisible creature. When Hope's mother came in the morning to wake the girl, she found her under the blanket. Hope was foaming at the mouth. The girl had had the first epileptic seizure of her life. The ambulance came quickly. When she arrived, the doctors tried to find out what had caused the seizure, but all Hope told them was that she felt sick all of a sudden. The doctors prescribed her potent sedatives. "I hope you took them all week." For that week, the creature didn't make herself heard. The girl fell quickly asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, but there was no one in her room but her. A week later, the creature came again. Again came the familiar smell of caramel and wet wool. heavy breathing, and the sound of hooves. 2 pupils stared intently at the girl throughout the night. It happened again and again. Hope was afraid her parents would think she was crazy, but still, she dared to talk to her mother again. She told her how a creature, unlike an animal or a ghost, came to her every night. Her mother shuddered when she talked about the caramel smell she smells every night. It turned out that Hope's mother had encountered a similar creature before in her childhood. It had also come to her at night. When Hope's mother was young, her grandmother often told stories about housekeepers who guarded homes and could sometimes come to people. Ghosts could make themselves known in various ways, by illuminated signs, moving objects, and unusual sounds. In this way, they attracted attention. No one knew what purpose these creatures pursued. There were cases when they drove people crazy, made them move out of their dwellings, and kicked out the house guests who stayed overnight. There were cases when the owners knew about the existence of a house dweller in their house and found a common language with them. Such was the case with Hope's mother. The girl's mother told her a way to make friends with the mysterious nocturnal visitor. That same night, Hope prepared herself. She brought not only the Holy Bible with her to the attic, but also a saucer with 3 caramel candies. The girl put the saucer in the corner where her housekeeper usually appeared. She could not sleep. She thought that if the creature didn't like her treat, he might attack her again. She feared that there were manimal others if one creature lived in the house. As she pondered, Hope didn't notice how she fell asleep. When Hope woke up in the morning, the first thing she did was run to check the candy plate. She was shocked to see that the vessel was empty. From then on, every night Hope began the same ritual. She would bring a candy bowl from the corner of her room. The nights passed quietly. The ceremony went on for weeks until one morning, Hope found the candy left untouched. That's when she knew the creature would never come to her again. Growing up, Hope sat in the kitchen of her parents' house. She was immersed in her memories. 20 years had passed since the housekeeper had appeared. She had almost gotten over her epilepsy attacks, and her stuttering hadn't stopped her from finding a man she loved and having a child. Her daughter was now 6 years old. Hope and her family came to her father's funeral. Despite his alcohol addiction, he lived much longer than his wife. Neighbors said that in recent months he had begun to lose his mind, constantly talking about a ghost that came to him at night. Eventually, the older man's heart failed, and he died at night in his bed. Doctors pronounced death from suffocation. They said it could have been due to a heart attack. Hope's daughter, Rosie, was given a room in the attic. Unfortunately for Hope, she couldn't put her daughter in the room where her father had died, and her husband was adamant that the child not sleep with his parents. Hope awoke at midnight to dogs barking. She wanted to ask her husband to quiet them, but she smelled something familiar from her childhood. It was the smell of wool and caramel. Hope jumped out of bed and ran to the nursery. She knew she didn't have much time. She tried to open the door, but the door was locked. Behind the door, the woman heard the clatter of hooves and the desperate cry of her daughter. "Leave her alone," Hope shouted. "You want me, take me. Remember me, you vile creature." Hope tried to break down the door, but it wouldn't budge. Her husband, who the screams had awakened, was already there, but he didn't understand what was happening. Rosie's riots outside the door began to sound like a wheeze. The creature was strangling her. There was little time left. My husband grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and began breaking the lock with it as hard as possible. The door gave in at the 3rd attempt. The couple ran into the room and found Rosie on the floor. Luckily, they made it in time. The girl was alive. Hope's family left the house that night. When Rosie recovered from her shock, she told how she saw a glowing triangle in the corner of the room and smelled caramel. She was terrified and screamed and then began to choke. Hope decided she would never go back to her parents' farm again. The house was put up for sale. It had been bought by a young family who had always wanted to move closer to nature and the farm. When they toured the house, they loved the antique furniture, the spacious rooms, and the light scent of caramel in the attic.